Every couple of years, engineers go in underneath one of the busiest airports in Japan, and they lift the building back up. Not repair it, lift it. 900 columns, 12 millimeters at a time. They do it because the island underneath will not stop sinking. Since they started building it, the ground under that terminal has dropped 13.7 meters. And none of that is the failure. The engineers knew the island would sink before they built it. They spent 7 years working out how far. They were still wrong. By the time the airport opened, it had already used up most of the sinking they had budgeted for its first 50 years. In 1964, jets arrived at Osaka's Itami Airport, and the noise over the neighborhoods around it turned into a pollution lawsuit. Osaka needed a new airport. What it did not have was anywhere to put one. So in 1974, they chose a site 5 kilometers out in Osaka Bay. Here is the part worth sitting with. The paper written by the man who ran the land reclamation company says the location was settled by social factors, that there was almost no room to argue about it on engineering grounds. The ground was not chosen because it was good, it was chosen because it was empty. The water there is 18 to 20 meters deep. They were going to build 500 hectares of island on the floor of it. Under that water is more than 20 meters of soft alluvial clay. Squeeze it and water comes out and the ground drops. Every engineer in Osaka Bay knew that layer. Underneath it is something else. 400 meters of older, stiffer clay laid down in the ice ages. Pleistocene clay. Osaka Bay had been reclaimed for centuries, but always close to shore, in shallow water, on small footprints. On those jobs, the load never really reached the deep clay, so the deep clay was treated as ground that did not compress. Kansai broke every one of those assumptions at once. 500 hectares is too wide for the load to spread out sideways and fade. It presses straight down, as a block, for hundreds of meters. For the soft upper layer, they had an answer, and it sounds backwards. They made the island sink faster. Drive vertical sand columns down through the clay, 20 meters long, 2.5 meters apart, and the trapped water has somewhere to go. Settlement that would take decades finishes inside a year. They drove 1 million of them under the first island. In the 35 years before this project, the whole of Japan had installed about 900,000. But you cannot put a sand drain through 400 meters of Pleistocene clay. That layer was going to do whatever it was going to do on its own schedule, and nobody had ever watched it happen. So they predicted it. 26 different settlement forecasts from different assumptions about how the clay would drain. Out of that range, they picked a number, 8 meters of total settlement by 50 years after opening. And then they did something I think is the best decision in this entire story. Before committing to the other 500 hectares, they built 6 of them. A test patch in the northwest corner, loaded up and instrumented, purely to find out whether the prediction was true. It was not. The real ground was tracking the worst case in the range, so they revised it and added the deep clay they had originally left out. The new figure was 11.5 meters on average from the start of construction to 50 years after opening. That is the number to hold on to. By the December after the airport opened, the 17 measurement points on the island averaged 9.82 meters of settlement. They had eaten most of a 50-year budget before the first scheduled flight. Which brings us to the terminal building. It is 1.7 kilometers end to end, and it stands on 900 columns. Every one of those columns is monitored automatically on its own, and every one of them sits on a plate that a hydraulic jack can lift. When part of the building sinks faster than the part next to it, engineers put jacks under the low columns, lift them, and pack the gap with steel plates. One column, one operation, 12 millimeters at most. The rule they hold it to is a slope of 1 in 400 between neighboring columns. By the time the engineers published their account, one column had been lifted a total of 80 centimeters. At first, they did it every year. As the ground has steadied, it is now once every few years. And one detail I cannot stop thinking about. The main terminal has a huge basement, so digging it out removed more weight than the building put back, which meant the middle of the terminal was too light and would sink slower than its own wings. Their fix was to bury 2.5 meters of iron ore under the foundation to make the building heavy enough to sink correctly. It was not quite enough. The middle of the terminal is still lighter than its wings, still sinking slower than they are, and that is exactly what the jacks are there to correct. In 1999, they started the second island, 545 hectares in deeper water for a second runway. By then, they had 12 years of the best settlement data anyone on Earth had from the first island. They built new models out of it. They drilled to bedrock 1,300 meters down. They put in 1.2 million sand drains. The second island has sunk further than the first one, 17.67 meters measured across 54 points. Not because they got worse at it, because it sits in deeper water on thicker clay, and thicker clay has more to give. It is still moving about 20 centimeters a year, 4 times the rate of the island next to it. Knowing exactly what the ground was going to do did not stop it doing it. It only meant nothing was a surprise. On the 4th of September 2018, a typhoon called Jebi came ashore in western Japan, the strongest to make landfall in 25 years. The storm surge put water across the airport. A tanker dragged its anchor and hit the bridge to the mainland, and for a while the only way off the island was by boat. It happened on the 4th of September. The airport opened on the 4th of September. It was 24 years old to the day. Since then, they have been raising the seawalls. Which is the honest ending here. This island was never finished and was never going to be. The settlement curve is still bending down, 13.7 meters and about 5 centimeters more every year. 900 columns waiting for the next lift. They did not build an airport that would stop sinking. They built one that could be kept level while it did.